Welcome to Murder Mile UK True Crime. This isn't a video, it's an audio experience. The only images you'll need for this episode are these. So close your eyes, open your mind, and savour the sounds of Murder Mile. How did acid become the weapon of choice for many of London's gangs? Find out on Murder Mile. Today, I'm standing on Woodchester Square in Paddington, W2. 2 streets west of the decapitated head of the alleged Algerian lover. 2 streets north of the second killing by London's forgotten gay slayer. 100 yards from where Marta Ligman's body was found in a suitcase floating in the canal. And the same square as the son who killed his parents to protect his dogs. Coming soon to Murder Mile. Completed in 1962 as part of the post-war regeneration of London's decimated housing. Woodchester Square prominently features 2 21-storey, 200-foot-tall residential tower blocks between the Grand Union Canal at Little Venice and the A404 Westway, a very busy carriageway. Covered in silver panels, concrete and glass. On the architect's page, it was probably hailed as a vision of the future. But now, with tacky shell suits hanging from every balcony, rusty satellite dishes only able to pick up Sputnik, and a line of 1990s hot hatches blasting out drum and bass, it looks like a blurry hangover of the past. Comprising of 127 flats, it is home for hundreds of people. But for one couple in particular, it was the scene of a terrifying experience which left them mentally scarred, and one of them physically injured for life. In 2018, Woodchester Square was one of far too many public places in London where criminal gangs used acid as a weapon, leaving their intended victims either disfigured, disabled, or dead. And even though it seems like a modern affectation of their arsenal of hate, it has a long and troubling history. But why is it used? How did we make it easier for those to abuse it? And what can be done to stop it? My name is Michael. I'm your tour guide, and this is Murder Mile. Episode 346, Vitriol. On Monday the 24th of September 2018, while Britain was still seething owing to the Novichok poisoning in Salisbury, bickering over Theresa May's failed Chequers plan over Brexit, and sweating having endured one of the hottest summers on record, long since beaten. It was a long hot night on this side of the city, and all that could be heard was the rush of traffic and the hum of very basic air conditioning. That evening, a couple, unnamed for safety reasons, had gone out to dinner. They'd had a pleasant meal, and being a few months pregnant, they were eagerly awaiting the arrival of their child. Driving home, all they had on their minds was the essentials for their new life: cots, cribs, nappies, and rattles. At exactly 9 p.m, they pulled up in their usual parking spot in the concrete car park outside of Princethorpe House in Woodchester Square, where the pregnant woman lived. Like all homes, she felt safe as they got out of the car, and her boyfriend began to walk her to her flat, as he'd done many times before. But safety is an illusion. We don't know why they were targeted, as fearing reprisals on themselves, their family and their friends. The couple never gave a statement to the police and never identified any of the suspects. But it wasn't believed to be personal or business, just profit, as they drove a nice car and wore expensive jewellery. From a parked van, the doors slid open and a gang of 5 men wearing balaclavas burst out, muffling the mouths of this terrified couple using gloved hands, as both were dragged, kicking and trying to scream into the van. The pregnant woman broke free and managed to flee, but with her boyfriend being the main target, of their pointless little heist. Roaring swiftly away, within seconds, he was gone. But taken by who, where to, and why? Whether the plan had gone awry, having only kidnapped one of them, is uncertain. But with him bound and blindfolded in the back of the van, being beaten black and blue, he was driven across West London for more than 4 hours. Never knowing where he was, where he was going, if he would even live to see his baby born. And although this must have been absolutely terrifying for him, the worst was yet to come. The gang were 5 pointless petty thieves who made a life for themselves by bringing misery to many. And although they almost certainly gave a wealth of excuses as to why they turned to crime, such as austerity and abandonment, hardships which many millions navigate without becoming leeches on the backside of society, this wasn't a crime to feed their family, but their drug habits, their fragile egos, and their dreams of being a gangster. They were 36-year-old Aston Rochester of Chaplin Road in Harrow, his 31-year-old brother Denzil, 23-year-old Jamal Gordon Harris of Dart Street in Culprit, 27-year-old Rennell Rutty of Creighton Close in White City, and 40-year-old Bradley Evans of Fulham Palace Road. 5 friends with criminal records. Back in 2007, when he was tried at Southern Crown Court, Denzil Rochester was described in the Harrow Times, his local newspaper, as part of a gang of drug-addicted robbers, being off their faces on cocaine. With 15 others, in a 4-month spree in which they targeted 5 branches of Ladbrokes betting shops a day, anywhere from Yorkshire to Devon. They would swarm around the Cash Quest gambling machine, split the cover on the terminal, and fool it into printing vouchers which they could exchange for cash. In total, they stole £55,000. And even if one of them had bothered to get a GCSE in maths, they'd have worked out that their little haul, divided between 16 people, only adds up to £3,500 each. And with the job having taken 120 days, that earns them just £30 a day, not including the cost of fuel, food or hotels. Their time would have been better spent sitting on their arses, watching television, earning £15 a day in unemployment benefits. But with the average cocaine addict spending £120 a day, their frazzled brains didn't think that way. All 16 were arrested, with Denzil Rochester jailed for a year, and the others, Mark Riley, Stephen Coyer, Christopher Mellin, Ashley Hutchinson, Shane McLeod, Lee Johnson, David Carey and Sean Murphy, all serving anywhere up to 12 months in prison, a community order, or being put on a drug treatment program. But did this stop them from committing further crimes? No, as the law is ineffective and slow to react. They all had prior convictions, being petty criminals who plagued the streets for their own selfish gain. Like in 2014, when Rennell Rutty was stopped by the police and 4 wraps of crack cocaine fell from his trouser leg. When searched, 6 more fell out. And like a crab Santa, while still in police custody, several more wraps fell from his body like his arse was a drug dispenser. And although he was convicted of intent to supply Class A drugs such as crack cocaine and heroin, sentenced to 2 years in prison, even though PC Nick Lee said, "I'm pleased that a drug dealer has been taken off the streets of Brent." Did it stop him for good? No, as too often the law is merely a minor obstacle for criminals for a brief period of time. The same is said of the weapons they use. Sometimes it's guns, sometimes it's knives, and sometimes it's acid. 3 years before the kidnapping at Woodchester Square, a similar attack occurred which had all the hallmarks of the other: kidnap, extortion, and violence. But as the culprits were never caught, it can't be determined if this heinous crime was committed by the same gang or some of the same members. In early April 2015, a 20-year-old economics student called Motaz Zaid was involved in a minor collision while driving his car. and instead of exchanging insurance details, the other driver jumped out and threatened him with violence if he didn't pay him £400, which Motaz did. This was little more than a crash for cash scam. A week later, on the 10th of April, while out with his friend at 12:40 a.m. at St Mark's Close, West London, his friend was stabbed and being dragged into a silver Mercedes estate. Motaz was blindfolded, bound, and driven around the city for hours to disorientate him. Pulling up a Beverley Way in Kingston, they tortured him for money. They beat him repeatedly. They pulled his ears with pliers. They made him swallow ammonia, and they sprayed his face with acid. Minutes later, a passing police patrol saw the car with the boot open. They gave chase and lost the target vehicle, but Motaz was found and taken to hospital. Motaz was placed in intensive care, given police protection, and was in a coma owing to his pain and infected skin. His father, Az, said,
"We don't know if his vision is affected. Doctors say it is very serious. He woke up today but cannot speak. His throat is very damaged. He can only point. My heart is broken when I see my son like that. I can't believe that anyone could do that to another human being."
Only these weren't humans who attacked Motaz, but animals, and sadly they were never caught. This has become a phenomenon,
as the UK has one of the highest rates of acid attacks per capita in the world,
according to the Acid Survivors Trust International, with recorded attacks increasing nearly threefold from 228 in 2012 to 601 in 2016, with 2017 being the worst year so far for acid attacks.
Unlike in other countries, where 80% of the acid attacks are against women, in the UK, most victims are men,
the ASTI say. Gang disputes are said to be behind the rise, with half of all UK attacks in London. Simon Harding of Middlesex University said,
"Acid was once a weapon of last resort, but may now be the first."
With many gang members swapping guns and knives for acid, as it's harder to monitor. Back in 2018, gun owners were required to have a thorough background criminal and medical check, a 5-year license, a good reason to own a gun such as sport or farming, with handguns largely banned. Knives required the owner to have a valid ID and a registered address for legal online purchases. But in 2018, there were no ID checks or age restrictions on the sale of acid. A child could buy sulfuric acid, as long as it wasn't stronger than a 15% solution, which could still disfigure, disable, and kill. We made these weapons simple and easy for gangs and any wannabe killer to buy. They have a devastating impact on the victims, but unlike any other weapon, have very few ramifications for anyone caught carrying it. Anyone illegally possessing a knife in the UK may receive an unlimited fine, a training order for youths, or up to 4 years in prison. Illegally possessing a gun carries a mandatory 5-year minimum sentence with a maximum of 7. Whereas acid had no specific legislation on its sale. The same year as the kidnap in Woodchester Square, 3 months before, on the 13th of July 2018, a devastating spree of acid attacks across East London was committed not by a dangerous criminal gang, but by one boy. "17-year-old Derek John was a passenger on a moped which trawled Stratford, Hackney, Shoreditch and Upper Clapton, an East London area given the dubious moniker of the Murder Mile. And in a 90-minute spree, they stole 2 mopeds and attempted to take 4 others, using acid as a weapon. At 9:30 p.m, at the junction of Pennybrook Street and Decoubertown Street in Stratford, he threw acid into the face of a 69-year-old moped rider, and after a terrifying foot chase, she managed to get away. At 10:25 p.m, on the corner of Queensbridge Road and Hackney Road, 32-year-old Jabed Hussain, an Uber food delivery driver, had acid possibly ammonia, thrown through the open visor of his helmet. His bike was stolen. He suffered severe facial burns and breathing problems, and unable to return to work and provide for his family, Jabed said he became
a totally different man.
And even though Jabed was left writhing in pain, the acid attackers didn't stop their spree. 24 minutes later, at 10:49 p.m, a 44-year-old man was sprayed with acid on St Paul's Road in Islington, but nothing was taken. At 11:05 p.m. on Shoreditch High Street, a 52-year-old man was splashed, but they failed to steal his bike. At 11:18 p.m. on Casanova Road in Upper Clapton, 24-year-old Bruno Goncalves was sprayed. And at 11:37 p.m. on Chatsworth Road in Lower Clapton, a 33-year-old man was also attacked. All were injured, physically and mentally, with one of the victims left with life-changing injuries. Giving evidence, Bruno Goncalves said he was stopped at a red light in Upper Clapton Road. He didn't see it happen, but felt it splash as Derek John sprayed acid into his face and eyes from an Evian bottle. Like cowards, they fled when he fought back, and although an ambulance was called, he was treated at a specialist hospital, but with his eye having turned black as 70% of the cells had been burnt, being left in excruciating pain, even though his sight partially returned. He couldn't afford the £150 it cost every fortnight in painkillers and medication to heal him, so he had to give up his job as a food delivery driver. Oddly, even though Derek John had no compassion for any of his victims, as he went to buy £5 worth of fuel at the Texaco petrol station on Mare Street in Hackney, he obeyed the law which said you mustn't wear a helmet inside of a petrol station, and the CCTV caught an image of his face and his clothes. Tried at Wood Green Crown Court in January 2018, found guilty of 6 counts of throwing a corrosive liquid with intent to disable, burn, maim, disfigure, or cause grievous bodily harm, with 2 counts of robbery and 4 counts of attempted robbery. Judge Noel Lucas said,
"If you'd been an adult, you'd have received a sentence of 22 years.
Instead, he was jailed for 10.5, with 3 in a Young Offenders Institute,
and half your sentence in custody. Then you'll be released on license."
It's likely he's already out, and his unidentified associate who drove the moped remains at large. But it's not just career criminals who use acid as an easily and readily available weapon. As examples across just 2017, on the 1st of April, Arthur Collins threw acid at 20 people in a nightclub called Mangal E8, leaving many with permanent scars. He claimed that what he threw was the date rape drug GBH, as if that's any better. And although he professed his innocence, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. On the 20th of July, Katie Leong scarred her boyfriend, 31-year-old Daniel Rotario, for life and left him blind, as having rejected her sexual advances, while asleep, she poured acid into his face and his eyes. She was convicted of his attempted murder and was sentenced to 17 years in prison for the attack. Legislation is always slow to catch up. If some people get hurt, there's a chance that the issue will be raised in Parliament, but often it only becomes law when enough people die and society demands it. In September 2015, 29-year-old Dutch engineer Mark van Dongen was left blinded and paralysed from the neck down, as well as losing a left leg, an eye and an ear, when his ex-lover, Belina Wallace, hurled concentrated sulfuric acid into his face as he slept. Having begged doctors to end his life, on the 2nd of January 2017, having chosen to die at a euthanasia clinic in Belgium, in a landmark case, his attacker was found guilty of throwing a corrosive substance with intent and sentenced to 12 years. But still, the law which legislates against the sale and use of acid as a weapon isn't a modern issue we're facing for the first time, but a very old one. Vitriol. It's a word we all understand. meaning bitter criticism or malice. But its origins stem back to the archaic word for sulfuric acid, first produced on an industrial scale in England in the 1740s. For centuries, vitriol was used as a common bleach and cleaning agent. But being so easy to obtain, during the labour disputes of the Industrial Revolution of the 1820s and 30s, acid was increasingly common as a weapon used by workers against their managers. With the Glasgow Herald of 1834 describing the crime as throwing vitriol, and becoming so common it was
a stain on the national character.
This came off the back of another case, when in February that same year, a man called Hugh Kennedy was hung for throwing vitriol willingly and maliciously into the face of a fellow servant as he slept. The man awoke in agony,
with one of his eyes being literally burnt out.
The people demanded change, and the paper said,
no punishment could be too severe. We would have their arms cut off by their shoulders and send them to Rome as outcasts from society, without the power of throwing vitriol ever again.
And even though some laws were changed, it was ineffective and would remain so for at least another 200 years. Still today, the term vitriolage means to throw acid or a corrosive substance into the face of another person to disfigure, maim, or kill. And yet, even in 2018, the laws around it are still as equally archaic. So what has this got to do with the kidnap of the couple in Woodchester Square? On the night of Monday the 24th of September 2018, at exactly 9 p.m, a nameless couple, their bellies full of food and a baby, pulled up in their usual spot in the concrete car park outside of the 21-storey tower block of Princethorpe House. They got out, he locked the doors and pocketed the key, and being easily 30 feet away from the communal doors of the flats, they felt safe. But then again, safety is only an illusion. From a parked van, 4 with a gang of 5 wearing balaclavas grabbed the couple. She kicked off and fled, and with the man dragged into the back. In a plume of dusty gravel, the van was gone in seconds. Bound, blindfolded and terrified, the man was kept pinned down by Aston Rochester, Jamal Gordon-Harris, Rennell Rutty and Bradley Evans, as Denzil Rochester drove the van across the city for the next 4 hours, with the man never knowing if he'd live or die, breathe his last, or be buried whole or in pieces. At some point, somewhere, he was bundled into the rear footwell of a car, where again he was beaten. The van was set alight, and the car was driven by Evans to his home in Fulham Palace Road, which they arrived at 1:15 a.m. Whether they knew him or not was irrelevant, as this wasn't about hatred or revenge. All they wanted was his money. They may not have even known how much he was worth, or whether they simply assumed he was minted because he drove a flash car, wore designer clothes and flashy jewellery. But inside this unidentified flat on the Fulham Palace Road, they would make him pay. Across the next 12 hours, with his wrists and ankles bound and his mouth gagged with tape, they took it in turns to beat and strangle him to the point of death. And then, having dragged him to the bath, they poured acid upon the bare exposed flesh of his naked body, it fizzing as it ate through the layers. Acid is a horrible weapon. When poured on exposed skin, initially the skin fights off the acid by causing a numbness. But that is only temporary. As being so caustic, acids like sulfuric can penetrate all the layers of the skin, causing 2nd and 3rd degree burns. With skin being 64% water, when acid hits it, a strong exothermic reaction occurs, generating heat and thermal burning, causing the skin to redden, blister, peel, and with the acid causing coagulation necrosis, also known as tissue death. It results in a dark brown or greeny-black scab, which masks the true depths of the underlying damage caused by the acid. But acid burns aren't just cosmetic, resulting in permanent scarring. They can also cause tissue damage, muscle loss, restricted movement, ulcers, chronic inflammation, a high risk of infection, organ failure, paralysis, blindness, and irreversible damage to the other senses, as well as coma and death owing to shock. Gangs use it as a weapon, as not only is it cheap to buy and unregulated, unlike guns and knives, but it causes excruciating pain, distress and terror across a very long and lingering torture. It leaves scars, which are a reminder to the victim and a warning to others. And although this man was hideously burned by the acid, he either couldn't or wouldn't give up his money, so the gang took it a step further. On a burner phone, they called his mother and demanded money. He was in pain, he was screaming. He told her that he feared for his life, and although she transferred £6,000, roughly £1,200 each, to his 5 hapless captors, having demanded a second payment, but with no more money to send, they had his mother leave his gold Rolex watch on the tyre of his car, still parked where the attack had took place. Evans drove to Woodchester Square. Gordon Harris grabbed the watch, and they sped away. As agreed, they dumped the man, with his skin blistered and bubbling, on the roadside. And spotted by a passerby, he was taken to hospital, where his condition was listed as critical, and although he lived, his outcome is unknown. The gang thought they'd planned the perfect heist, but criminal gangs are rarely smart. They'd abducted a rich man who wasn't rich, for an amount of money which for each of them only added up to less than the minimum monthly wage. Having threatened them, neither the man nor his girlfriend gave a statement for fear of reprisals. And although the robbers wore balaclavas and burned out the car and the van, destroying any fingerprints and DNA, meaning that the acid-strewn flat in the bathtub on Fulham Palace Road couldn't be found. But as Jamal Gordon Harris collected the Rolex from the car's tyre, it was captured on CCTV, as well as his face, and the car's driver being Evans. And even though the license plates were false, identifying those two led to their other known associates. Jamal Gordon Harris and Rennell Rutty were arrested after grabbing the Rolex. Denzil and Aston Rochester were arrested at home that same day, with Bradley Evans arrested just weeks later on the 31st of October. Following a 6-week trial at Harrow Crown Court, with the evidence provided by the Met Police's Modern Slavery and Kidnap Unit, all 5 of the gang denied the charge of conspiracy to kidnap. But on Friday the 12th of July 2019, they were all found guilty. Aston Rochester to 11 years and 3 months, his brother Denzil and Rennell Rutty to 9 years and 9 months, Jamal Gordon Harris to 10 years and 3 months, and Bradley Evans to 10 years and 9 months. With it costing £53,000 a year to imprison each of them, it will cost the UK taxpayer £2.75 million excluding legal fees. And all because these idiots stole £6,000 and a watch. In 2017, 1 year before, Home Secretary Amber Rudd told the Tory party conference, "Acid attacks are revolting. We're going to stop people carrying acid in public if they don't have a good reason." With the introduction of the Offensive Weapons Act of 2019, this made it
illegal to carry a corrosive substance in a public place in the UK without a good reason or lawful authority.
This law brought acid in line with the possession of knives in a public place, and anyone caught
could be imprisoned for up to 4 years.
An age restriction of 18 was set on all corrosive products. Police had the powers to stop and search anyone suspected of unlawfully carrying an acid without good reason, such as being a plumber. And sulfuric acid at a concentration above 15% now requires a Home Office license. And the use of acid as a weapon can lead to severe charges, such as GBH with intent, which can result in a life sentence. Initially, the Offensive Weapons Act of 2019 saw a 70% decrease in acid attacks in the UK from 2019 to 2021, which may partially have been down to the pandemic. but 2022 showed a 70% increase in cases, with a further increase of 75% in 2023. As it was 200 years before, the laws around throwing vitriol are as archaic and ineffective as before. The misuse of corrosive substances isn't as regulated as it needs to be, so sadly, acid remains the weapon of choice for many London gangs. And it will remain so until the law changes. So there we go, folks. There we go.